Hello.
Hello. Good
Hi.
morning.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. We're back from a small little mini break.
Yeah. Yes.
This is nice.
And yeah, I think it was an unintentional break, really, wasn't it? But it
Yeah, I
made
kind of we kind of said, oh yeah, let's skip this one recording, and then suddenly one recording turns into a couple recordings. And then we decided maybe we'll shake up the format a little bit. We'll do we'll split the two calls. We do two calls a month, don't we? So we'll do two podcasts. I still feel it still feels awkward to call it a podcast. But
I know.
yeah, one of them will have more structured, like this one will have a topic that we're going to talk about. Today's one is reigniting a creative spark and creativity. And then the second one is just going to be much more free flowing, chatting, just our general friendship, just in an hour condensed recording.
Yeah. I think it's going to be cool, and I think yeah, for me it takes that pressure off of having to come up with a topic that I think will be valuable for people to listen to, because just that little bit of background that might be interesting. I think when we started this, we were really excited to just come on and just have a conversation and see where it went. And then the more we did that, the more it started to feel like, oh, we need to roughly know what we're going to talk about so that we don't just keep having the same conversations over and over again.
Yeah.
So yeah, this I think feels really good. But that's the beauty of something like this, isn't it? That we can see how things go, we can tweak it
Yeah.
as needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just when something's new, and I think this is very valid in terms of creativity as well. But when something's new and you have that sort of initial burst of energy towards something, and then as it shifts and change, you almost have to like employ creativity on purpose. And it's like I think we kind of think of creativity as being this thing that's just always there, that's something that we can just draw upon when we need it, or if there's a certain project that we're working on, creativity is going to be there at the right time, at the right point in the process. Um, and actually, like anything else, it's a flowing being that we kind of we work with and intertwine ourselves with in different ways.
Mhm.
And this is just one of those things where at the beginning it can be very open, it can be very free flowing. And as you get to know something, as you get to understand something, or you get deep into a process, you almost have to take a little bit more control over something sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, beautifully put. I love that. Yeah, and it is a nice lead in to the topic of creativity. I know that this is the focus for you going into February. Do you want to
Yeah.
share how that's going, what the focus is, and anything else about that?
Yeah, it's so interesting because kind of accidentally this podcast has maybe been like a little it's kind of been me recording my life for the last few months. But yeah, so January I took completely off and pretty much uh, banished, but not out of any sort of negativity, but really put being creative out of my mind. Didn't put any pressure on it because I think one of the key things that I have come to understand is that when we are in a burnout state, or when we're stressed, or for whatever reason when our nervous system is activated and we're in those fight, flight, or freeze states, whether for an a small amount of time or for an extended period of time, we don't have access to creativity because we don't have access to a lot of our brain. So January for me was really about bringing myself back into a sense of safety and of bringing a sense of regulation to my nervous system again, so that I was able to access options, so that I was able to access choice. Because when we're in those activated states, when our nervous system kind of takes over, and we enter a very automated state of being, so there's no heightened logic, or not even logic, there's no heightened intellect or anything connecting different dots. There's no ideas bouncing around, because in those states all that we see are exit routes. And exit routes might be they're going to be those fight, flight, or freeze options, none of which are going to bring us particularly enjoyable creative states. So that was the first focus. The first focus was just to chill out. And then once I started kind of understanding that I was getting a little bit bored, I was kind of a little bit done with full rest. Then I just started to play with creativity in different ways and completely unattached to any sense of work, which I think has been one of my pressure points. To pigeonhole creativity into my work or into a particular setting has made it feel like distasteful. Like there's something in that attachment that has just turned me off of it. So yeah, I just started to play with it in different ways, and try different things, shake up kind of the sources that I was getting inspiration from. So yeah, it just kind of is now starting to become more of a like a game, almost like a back and forth playful activity. That's not to say that it is not difficult. It is very difficult. But yeah, I'm trying to just invite creativity again and allow it to be with me.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. It's it feels kind of like it could be helpful for us to talk about what we mean when we say creativity here, because I really heard you touching on like what that means for you and like what it even is. Because for me, I think I've always thought that I always had this sense that creativity, when we get shown creativity, we get shown like artistic projects and making things, and it's very artsy, I find. I mean, maybe this is just me, but I see creativity and I see like bright colored paint. And you said something interesting there about the brain and like making connections, and I think it's a cool description of creativity to think like creativity is like, it's not just that, it's like using your brain to connect dots, to link things together. Because when you said that, I was thinking, well, is it a form of creativity when I'm coaching somebody? Because a lot of the time, like my brain is kind of connecting things they're saying, and like connecting things they've said to me in past sessions. And sometimes it does feel like all these little things like dropping in and coming in to make a complete picture. So it's kind of cool to like look at what are all the different ways that you're already creative. Because I think sometimes I for me, certainly, when I try and find something, I don't find it. Like the more you search for something, the less likely it is to appear. Whereas I wonder if maybe like looking at how creativity already shows up can be clues to more of it.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And even further than that, even to widen the definition even more, like scientists have to be creative in order to come up with new ideas. They have to pull together theories from all different places in order to come up with something new. Mathematicians, there's creativity in numbers, there's creativity in problem solving. My partner used to be an electrician, and sometimes there would be situations where he had to use information from all kinds of different places to solve a problem that didn't make any sense. And there's no way when you would think about what's creativity that an electrician would come to mind. It doesn't for me anyway. But definitely I think there's an element of creativity in so many different places, and it's often the first point of it's the first thing that we play with something, you know. It's like it's the initial dance with whatever we're toying with, whatever our focus is on. Creativity is the initial what's going on here kind of attitude, and can I think about it in a different way? And then after that, once we've moved through creativity and gone, you have something more tangible, then you work with it differently. You don't think about it so creatively. You almost flesh it out a little bit more. But yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to broaden that definition of what creativity is, because otherwise we gatekeep it. We make it something, you know, really like, oh, it's almost making it too sacred, you know, like, because it's then we can't touch it.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's really freeing as a concept, because when I've thought about creativity in the past, I kind of have this sense that if I'm being creative, it has to be that I'm having fun.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So actually, to think that using your mind creatively maybe isn't always fun, right? I'm sure, like, when your partner was problem solving in his job, he wouldn't have described it as a fun, exciting endeavor. Yeah, he was using his creative brain to do so. So I think that's quite freeing for me to go, oh, actually, because sometimes I think, oh, I'm not creative enough. I don't have enough space for creativity, as you say. But if I really look at it through this lens and start to see, oh, actually, I'm being creative when I work out how to get my dog to eat when she won't eat, and all these little things throughout the day.
yeah,
We are flexing that creative muscle probably more than we think already.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it makes it that element of fun. I think that's a big one, and it's, for me anyway, it can have quite a lot of weight associated with that. You know, am I having enough fun? What's fun as an adult? Like, what's
Yeah.
fun? Yeah, are there other people having more fun? You know, all of these different associations just kind of come um, along with something that is meant to be so joyous and carefree. But but yeah, so when I detach that idea of it has to be fun, um, you know, like, one of the things that I've been just playing with a little bit is just to even be creative when I like go for a walk. So if I'm going for a walk, then quite often you can get into, you know, your standard, your well-trodden paths, can't you? But just to take a left when you would normally take a right, or to or to just allow yourself to get lost and then to have to pull up a map and be like, where the hell am I? Um, but just to allow a little bit more freedom in those thought processes, which again we don't have access to when we're not, in a sense, when we're not in a regulated state,
Yeah.
which I think is really key, because I I put a lot of pressure on myself, like last year when I was fully in burnout phase. Then I was still trying to push it, and I was still saying, like, why am I not coming up with anything? You know, why aren't I inspired?
Mm.
um why don't I want to create anything? Why don't I want to write? Blah blah blah. um and that it just wasn't available to me, and it wasn't my fault, and it didn't mean anything more than I just needed to take care of the state that I was in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really hard place to be, isn't it, when you're in that? Because I've been in those circumstances too, and I think how I felt at the time was like I wanted to do the opposite of what I probably really needed to do. Like, from that place, there felt like there was such an urgency for me to get re-inspired, to be able to focus on my work, to be able to, bring in income and clients and all of that. And, so there was this desire to, like, get up, get at the computer, try and work things out, try and be writing things and trying to work. And it, as you say, like, it's impossible from that state. That if you do by any miracle create some work from that place, you look back at it and you think, I can't use that because it's come from force.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the walk, I was thinking back to that time. I used to take myself on these walks, and I would come back and I would be so inspired, and I thought it was just being in the fresh air. But now I wonder if I was activating creativity in my brain, because one of the little things that I do when I walk is I will ask myself, what are the messages like that are appearing to me from what I can see around me? And so, if I walk past a river, you know, and the river's like particularly choppy that day, like I might take a message from that. And if I see a little duck bobbing on it, like being okay with those waves, I might take something from that will be unique to me, that you would take something completely different from. And I would see like a tree that had fallen, and I would be asking like, well, what is that trying to tell me? And I saw that as part of my spiritual practice, but actually through this lens of this conversation, I think I was probably activating and igniting creativity for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really key as well, because again, it brings it back down to what's real, what we can touch. And that's not to say that there's not merit in a spiritual
Yeah.
in that being a spiritual message. It absolutely is. But at the same time, if what we want in our lives is more creativity, to notice that, oh, my brain does this for me. Like
Yeah.
my brain wants to bring together different pieces of information and to understand something, or to create to bring a new thought into existence that wasn't there before. That's it's really beautiful to actually see that happening, even at points, often when we're looking for a message, or we're looking for a sign out, when we're on a walk. It's not necessarily because we're always in a really good place. Sometimes we need a message to come to us to tell us to keep going, or that everything is all right, and those kinds of things. So the fact that our brain is already giving us that, as well as giving us terrible thoughts that plague us day and night, but is giving us beauty too, and is giving us creativity without us even really having to sit down and be like, come on, I have to do this. It's
Yeah.
freeing.
Yeah, like stepping out of the driver's seat a little bit and being like, I don't have to come up with this stuff.
Yeah.
This stuff comes to me.
Mm.
I just have to create the state to be open to receive it, which is, when I'm sitting on my desk with a furrowed brow, I'm not open. I'm not, I'm firmly in the driving seat and there's no space. When I go for a walk, there's an opening there. There is that space for it to come in. So, yeah, I think that's really, really beautiful. And within this, there's something really special coming through in this conversation for me, of that it's almost like permission to marvel at your mind, because
Yeah.
I think in these circles that we're in, personal development, spirituality, coaching, there's so much talk about getting rid of the mind, and how the mind is almost an enemy. And the human mind is incredible. Like, why would we want to get rid of that? And we can, there is ways that we can work with our mind that are more beneficial for us. But I think what this conversation is bringing me is that, like, we get to be okay with having a mind, like not only be okay with it, but treasure it for its problem solving and its connecting of dots ability that allows us to be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, that the our mind is only a reflection of the state that we're in. There's the same mind that brings us spiritual inspiration, or to see something beautiful in the world around us, is the same mind, the same brain that that keeps us stuck, or keeps us questioning, or keeps us doubting. It's just the different state that we're in that allows us to access different parts of it, or allows the mind itself to shift and change to reflect what's because the brain, I mean, I get mind blown by all this stuff all the time, but the brain is constantly working in like a give and take relationship with the rest of the body. So the brain is receiving information from the rest of the body that tells it what state the physical body is in, and therefore what state the mind should be in, you know, what thoughts we should have, and what we should be aware of in the world, i.e. how much danger we should perceive. So it's kind of, and the same thing happens in reverse, that our thoughts and our perceiving of danger affect the hormones that are released, and therefore the state of the physical body. So it's in a constant give and take, but you know, it's there, as it's not the only thing that is there, you know. Although the brain is one of the things, the neurons in the brain are sparking and allow us to have original thought, it can only do so when receiving information from the rest of the body that tells it that it's okay to do so, you know, that it doesn't have to supply all resources to protection or defense mechanisms.
Yeah, beautiful. So in actual fact, like putting more pressure on ourselves to be creative, you know, sitting with that furrowed brow at the desk is actually, as we experience it, but also scientifically proven to not give us the outcome of being more creative.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool, right? Because I talked a lot, you know, I'm sort of shifting away from that focus in my business, but it still is so important to me to, you know, to be able to relax, to be able to slow down, to be able to, be regulated before we do our work. And so this is beautiful, right? Because it's like, that's not just some wishy-washy hippie idea. That's actually the fact that your brain will work more in harmony with you, with your goals, with what you want to achieve, if you can create that, you know, state of calm or peace or inspiration around you first. So I think that's really beautiful. And it kind of, you know, it kind of makes me think about like the world of work, because obviously, you know, if you run your own business or you do your own work at home, you have a lot more control over that. But I'm thinking about when I used to get up and, you know, rush to get ready for work, sit in traffic to go to the office, and then be in that office environment, harsh overhead lighting, lots of noise, like the temperature wasn't always how I wanted it to be, like, and then there was such a push on productivity. And it just really makes me think about how, you know, I was part of a team there that was looking at productivity of the workforce, and I wish I could go back into that role with like everything I've learned over the last 5 or 6 years, because we didn't talk at all about environment as a precursor to productivity, which just blows my mind now.
And the interesting thing is that I think the world office work is actually kind of built for productivity. It's not built for creativity in the slightest. So all of those things, you know, the same environment every day, the same desk, the same people, the hours, the routine, all of that is, I think it was actually put in place on purpose, but I don't have any proof, or I can't remember any proof to say that, but it was built, the environment was established in order so that people could turn up and do the same thing every day. And I think it was based on factory work, and, you know, a production line. The same sort of thing was transferred into to more kind of mental work, office-based work. And but it's definitely, there's a massive difference between getting up and doing the same thing every day and getting up and trying to create something new every day. Like those, like it's just impossible. There's just no way that you could those standard office environments are the best environment for creativity, which again is why you get these real big companies with a lot of economic power, that they create these amazing offices
Yeah.
because they're creating environments that are built for people to think differently within.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting how there's almost that overhang from like production line factory work, because the environment I was working in, UK financial services, yes, there are processes that just have to be done the same way every day. There is that focus there, but actually the company that I was in, I think this is common for a lot of companies now, even if you wouldn't expect it from the outside, they do want more from their employees. Like, they do want them to think more creatively. They want them to problem solve. They want them to treat each customer they speak to and give them like the highest outcome. And so, really, like, we were talking about productivity in that role that I was in, but maybe we should have been talking about creativity, because actually that's what you would need to be a top performer against our measures that we had. And we just weren't looking at that, because actually if you were hitting all your productivity outputs, you were just seen as a standard worker, right? Like, that wasn't making you a top performer. To be a top performer, you had to think creatively.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And then I had a thought. It goes back to something you said a few sentences ago, so apologies if it's not completely flowing easily. But what another interesting thing is that with the nervous system states, some of them are up regulated, so you do need to bring yourself into a state of calm, and other nervous system states are down regulated. So some people might find that they need up regulation in order to enter a creative mindset, whereas other people might need to be down regulated first, which I think is really important when you think about and also some individuals are more prone to a certain state, but we also all experience each one of those states all the time. So it's you might need a different thing one day to what you need the next day, and we've almost unconsciously, or at least I have, done the same thing in my own work from home environment as I was taught to do in an office, which is to create a lovely setup, to create a lovely desk, a wonderful place to work, but then I go and sit there every day and expect to be able to do the same thing, when actually what we need more often than not, if we do want to be creative rather than productive, is variation and is difference, which is a really interesting way of rethinking the way that we might need to work, might need to change depending on what task we need to do that day.
I love that. I love that. And I would love in a second for if you wouldn't mind sharing, like, how do you know if you need up regulation or down regulation? I think that'd be really helpful. But just to say, like, when you talk about having your desk and setting it up, I did that for the first 2 years of my business. I had a desk, I set it up, it was beautiful, I had my beautiful things on it, flowers every week, all of that. And now I don't have a desk, I don't have a set working place, and I stopped doing that after 2 years because it just wasn't working for me at all. And now sometimes I'm sitting on the floor, sometimes I'm sitting on my bed, sometimes I'll go out and work in a cafe, or sit at a dining room table, and I can't have that static workplace at all. It's not helpful.
That's really interesting. And have you noticed a shift in the way that you work since doing that?
Absolutely, yeah, because I think as well we can, there's this concept in NLP called anchors. And if you sat, I was sitting at that desk, and more often I was feeling like frustrated, stressed, anxious, really lacking any creativity. And so actually I was almost like creating this Pavlovian response within myself of like anchoring those feelings to that space. So then every time I went and sat in it, I think my body was responding to the previously installed programs of when we sit here, we feel stressed, anxious.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been cool not to have that.
Yeah, I love that. And have you noticed that certain places are better for certain types of work, or do you not pay as much attention to that?
Well, I definitely think that if I just know exactly what needs to be done, so if we're talking productivity here rather than like creativity, if I already know what needs to be done, like it's just work that I need to work through, and I know the end goal, and I've already done the creative aspect, then it works really well for me to go out to a cafe, which might seem weird, right? People might think that it's more, creativity would thrive in a cafe environment because you're seeing lots of different things, and maybe it would. But for me to go to a cafe, put headphones in, and just like be in the energy of the space, but be working. If I try and do that work at home, I get bored and I get distracted, and I go and make a cup of tea, and I go and put the washing on, and I play with my dog, and I don't do it. So taking myself out of my home environment for that type of work is really beneficial.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah, and
interesting. I love that.
yeah, and then I think for creative work for me, I really prefer working outside the home. For someone who works from home, I really, it's not my favorite thing to do. So in the
Yeah.
summer and when it's warmer, my creative work is always done outside if possible. It works for me to go and spread a blanket out on some grass and take a load of journals and some oracle cards and some books and just spend like 5 hours
Mm.
in that space.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love that you've got to know those different rhythms for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's only taken 5.5 years, but
Woohoo! We are quick learners.
yeah. I don't want to miss it. Do you want to tell us about upregulation and downregulation?
Sure. Yeah, so that tends this is loosely defined. Some people might experience things differently. But typically your fight or flight responses are upregulated. So that's when you're likely to notice that you might be more likely to be talking quite fast. Your thoughts would be racing. Maybe you might experience some jittery movements in the body, unable to sit still. Distraction, like kind of popping up over and over again, so you can't focus on one thing. That might indicate that you're upregulated and would need to kind of bring yourself down in order to reach a regulated state. Be that through breath work, meditation, whatever it is, maybe yoga, or those, what's that amazing, those movements that you always see amazing people doing in parks, like Tai Chi or something like that,
Oh, yeah.
something that is grounding to the body, that is soothing and calming,
For
is
me,
likely to
it's
bring you
laying.
down.
Oh, sorry. For me, it's laying my legs up the wall, hands down. Love it.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. They're just anything that kind of brings you down a peg is good for those states. And then if you find yourself more likely to move into a free state, so that's likely to be slower movements, slower thoughts. So you might find that you can't quite get hold of a thought. It's the more like brain fog type thing. Sluggish. You're maybe less likely to be able to wake up earlier, or wanted to move faster or anything like that. Those are things that are more like, so that's where I tend to, my nervous system tends to go into freeze. And it can also be a bit of a journey. So you may find that freeze is the last point in your nervous system reaction. So you might first move into fight or flight. And when that is not effective, your nervous system shuts down, or shuts down the body, and you move into a freeze state. And so then you might need to come through an upregulated state first in order to bring yourself down. So you come out of freeze into So let me go back a step before I forget. So if that was not your journey and you just want to bring yourself into a more regulated state, but you're in freeze, you might find something more effective to move the body quicker. So whether that's like through a few series of just little jumps, star jumps, movements, a jog if you like that, so anything that requires faster movements. My mind's going blank now, but just anything that kind of that pushes a reaction from the body rather than allowing yourself to, like, for me, if I go into meditation or yoga when I'm in a freeze state, it keeps me in my freeze state. I'm like comatose, but after that point I'm not going to get anything done. So I need to upregulate myself. That's when I walk. I walk quite fast. I like hills. Those kind of things get me a little out of breath and allow me to kind of contact myself again. But yeah, and then if you need to go through an upregulation state first, it might bring you into a more jittery state. It might bring you, and then you might get your racing thoughts, you might get the jitters and everything like that. But then you might find that yoga might work. So it's a different journey depending on what your nervous system has been through, what your trauma response is, what your individual experience is like. But yeah, it's not always about calm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's really good to know, and it's helpful, right? Because everyone's always told, like, if they're not getting anything done, if things are just not moving, if they're stressed or whatever, you kind of put those things together, right? We kind of like put those two states as one thing and go like, we'll take some deep breaths and meditate, but actually that could be really the worst thing for someone who is already in the down-regulated state.
Yeah, and not worst in terms of in a harmful way. It's because those things are not bad for the body, but what they won't do is bring you out of freeze. They might not bring you to a place where you're able to actually get anything done, or you want to move towards anything that you want to do, because you're still going to find yourself kind of fighting through that sludge.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I know that this response isn't recognized everywhere, so I'm not sure whether you will have much to share on it or not, but what about the fawn response? Because I learning about the fawn response for me, I was like, oh, this is interesting for me. This is, it's that let me fawn, let me like people please as a trauma response. And actually, when I was reading up about this, I saw someone describe it as it's actually kind of masterful in a way, because it's avoiding it's like manipulating the nervous system to not go into fight or flight or freeze. It's like it's having to be like hyper aware to not do that and to like do this fawn response instead. And I just thought that was an interesting description of it, because it's a controlling mechanism. And I do think a lot of the time, like, people who are people pleasers or codependents, they have a controlling aspect to them. So do you know anything about that one? Is there anything that
I have done some reading, but it was a really long time ago, so this might be incorrect, but I think it falls. So there's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. I believe parasympathetic is upregulated, but that could be wrong. It could be the opposite, but I believe it falls into the same nervous system response as freeze does.
okay,
So I think it's down regulated. But yeah, it's a really interesting one, because the way that I kind of liken it in my brain to freeze is that you're abandoning everything that is your own. Like, you're abandoning your own response, which is kind of ironic considering the control aspect in it.
Yeah.
But just like with freeze, you kind of just completely shut down, and you're unable to access yourself in a response. Fawn's the same kind of thing. You're unable to access the parts of you that are your own in your response, because you can only respond to the other person's nervous system and what is best to do to regulate theirs rather than regulate your own.
Interesting. I wonder if, you know how you were saying like you might have to, you might have to do one then the other. I'm just thinking there, like for this form response, I wonder if there's anything in that as well, of like you go low because you completely abandon all of your own stuff. But then I wonder if, like, because I'm thinking about that form response, like you actually end up going a bit fast after, like you're like overthinking, and you're thinking about how to fix this situation. And so I wonder if it's the opposite of the one you were talking about earlier, where like instead of going high and then having to come low, you go low and then high.
Maybe yeah. It's really, I mean, it's all so fascinating to me, but it's especially when we think about how these things are activated like on a micro level all the time, and then we have obviously our larger trauma responses and those extended periods of time that we're stuck in these states. But yeah, it's really useful to just notice what state am I in at any one point, where am I on this scale of the nervous system? And it might not necessarily be negative, but it's just interesting to know, okay, how am I responding to this, either this other nervous system, this other person, because our nervous systems are like scanners, they're constantly reading other people's as well. So where am I in relation to this other nervous system? Where am I in response to work or this environment or this pattern? What brings it up for me? So it's useful.
Yeah, this is so interesting. And I would love maybe for us to have like a whole conversation about the nervous system at some point, because when you just said, your nervous system works like a scanner and it's, looking and picking up things from other people's nervous system, I was wondering, like, are people who are empaths or like naturally more tuned into others, are they more likely to have dysregulation in their nervous system as a result of that? Because because I think like a lot of people,
Right, yes.
it's a straight yes. I love, it's so helpful to know, right? Because I think that there's probably coaches listening to these conversations, and I often think that people who go into coaching most of the time are empaths as well, and that's why they've ended up in careers where they want to help other people, because they're so tuned in to people's need. So do you think that particular group, therapists, coaches, people who work with other people, are it's even more important for them to understand this stuff than the general population?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I think I think if it's your career, if it's your work that you do every day as a coach, you have to be attuned to that other person's nervous system, whether you're aware of it or not. Like the somatic work that I'm trained in is to be actively attuned to that person's nervous system, but you're doing it all the time, whether you have that background or not. That's what makes you a good coach. That's what makes anyone who does it effective. But that means that and so one of the things that I am trained in is like to hold a dual perspective. So to hold, and this is difficult. It's not easy, but to hold, to have a perspective of that person's nervous system and mine at the same time. So I'm aware not only of when theirs has a response, but when mine does too, and to not then allow that to affect my coaching or those kinds of things. And I think it's just one of those things that's really useful for anyone to get used to noticing, is almost having an awareness and a separateness at the same time. So you have a connection, you need a connection to coach people. It's one of the beautiful aspects about it. But if we entirely give ourselves over to that, we lose our own sense of self, we lose our own sense of self capacity, for how we're being affected at the same time. If we do that day after day, then our nervous system is just completely shot. We don't have access to that sense of self anymore, which I think is a really dangerous place to be.
Yeah. Oh, I wonder if this is, could be partly why there's tends to be so much burnout in this industry. Because a lot of the conversations I have with people are that they're exhausted by this work. So even though they love it, so I think it would be really good to perhaps end this conversation with, what does a regulated nervous system feel like? How do you know when you've either down regulated or up regulated? And I know this is something that changes, but just so people can hold on to like, this is regulation.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. It is a difficult thing to say, because I think there's a tendency for it to almost feel like something to achieve.
Yes.
Like, to achieve a regulated nervous system is like one of those traps of being like, happiness, or
Yeah.
what's those, high vibration, all those all those little traps. So a regulated nervous system is not something to necessarily attain, and you cannot keep a constant state, so don't even try. But a regulated nervous system does, it's one of those things where you're not really aware of it, if you're in it, because you only really notice it when it's out. But you're able to achieve, it's a sense of almost like like nothing, a sense of peace, but not a peace that comes attached with it, like, oh, I'm really happy right now. It's a sense of peace that's just there. And so what I do in coaching sessions, before I enter the call, it's my own responsibility to make sure that even if I was dysregulated 5 seconds before I get on that call, that I am breathing, or I'm moving, or I'm contacting my senses in order to bring myself back into the present moment. So dysregulation is often an evacuation through whichever means of the present moment. So presence is very important in regulation. I do that a lot with smell. I always light incense before coaching calls, and I use it intentionally. I use breathing it in, probably not good for my lungs, very smoky, as a means of being like, this is my present moment, this is my present state. If I feel myself getting dysregulated in a call, then I do allow almost like a momentary or behind the scenes state where I allow myself to notice which parts of myself are becoming dysregulated, which parts am I activated, or am I wanting to avoid something. And again, just allow a dropping in to my own presence, my own sense, my own physical body, be that through just noticing where my seat meets the chair, all these little tiny little things that just allow us to say, okay, I'm here in this present moment, and I'm able to tend to myself at the same time as I tend to this person. Is that helpful? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And I think answering the question as like, if you're regulated, you won't be thinking about this stuff. Like, if you're regulated, you won't be you will just be there. And so I think it's really beautiful to know, like, this is not something to attain, it's not something to chase, it's something that's going to happen. And I guess the more you have access to sensitivity, like the more sensitive you become to the awareness of like where your nervous system is, and you can employ those early tools to regulate, like, That sounds like a beautiful practice to me.
Yeah. And I think as coaches, one of the things to bear in mind is that your client's nervous system is attuning to you, even if you're not in the same room, even if it's on Zoom, your
Yeah.
client's nervous system is attuning to yours. So if you can provide an unspoken sense of a regulated, safe nervous system, there you are allowing the environment within which they can regulate to you. So you don't even have to work consciously or through any questioning about bringing them into a sense of safety. Your nervous system is doing it for you if you can allow that dual perspective.
Beautiful. I love that. Yeah. And I think it's so cool to recognize like so much of these speaking therapies, it might really not be so much about the words. It might be about being together in space.
Yeah.
I think that's really a lovely thing to know. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Is there anything else that you want to say before we close this call today?
No, I think we maybe slightly got off the creativity track, but I'm totally here for it. But yeah, and I think with all of this, one of the things that is really important is I think to lower our expectations a little bit. Like we said at the beginning, creativity is not this grand, unachievable thing that's outside of our reach. When we are trying to reignite that spark, all of this goes into that. So whether it's just bringing in a sense of safety through whichever means necessary, that's there to reignite the spark. Whether it's to lower our expectations, to lower the stakes. I really don't think it's the best idea to try and reignite a creative spark by working on your next project or the next thing in your work that's going to like dramatically change your life, because that the stakes are so high that we've got no room to play. If you want the creativity to be available for that project, then play with Sudoku first, super low stakes, and just or the walks, all of these kinds of things that just allow you to get there first. Small steps.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it feels like letting these natural processes take over and do the work they're meant to do, like we were saying, like get out of the driving seat. I mean, thinking about like Einstein saying that if he was stuck on a problem, he would just like go and do something completely unrelated for a few hours and like let his mind problem solve in the background. Like I think there's a lot to be said for like stopping trying to do it all yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
getting out the way a little
Absolutely.
bit.
Yeah. I love that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, my love.